We are set. So, right. The stuff that I put up online today, and I know you haven't had a chance to look at it yet, talked about painters in Utrecht. And we didn't get to them, did we? We sort of ended with Goltzius. Is that right? Yeah. Okay, so we were looking at early 17th century art in these two different centers. Well, we were mostly looking at Haarlem. And we were talking quite a bit about how the art of Italy sort of made its way there, right? Specifically Mannerism through Bartolomeus Stronger, right? Who Carl van Mender brought. What we find, and the online thing talks about this a bit, is that in Utrecht, in the city of Utrecht, which by the way is a great little town. If you're looking for something to do for the afternoon, I think I'm going to go to Utrecht. It's got a great museum, and the canals are like 30 feet below street level, which makes them kind of more like plazas. It's really anyway. In Utrecht, we see some of the influence of Mannerist art as well, but more important than that, we see the influence of Caravaggio. And really strong throughout the city, brought there primarily by three painters who had gone to Italy, right? So Gerrit van Honthorst and two other painters around 1610, which is just after Caravaggio died, had gone to Rome. Now, it was kind of normal for artists to go to Rome. That was not uncommon, right? It's kind of expected of artists to go to Rome. They had gone, they had seen Caravaggio's work, they brought it back, right? They started to assimilate it into their own works. They come back to Utrecht, and they begin to make works of art in a Caravaggio manner. So we call them Caravaggisti, followers of Caravaggio, right? Although they're not... why am I not on the first page? Why is this not showing slide number 1? Let's go back one. Hang on a second, I'm not in my slide management mode. There we are. Yes, I think there I am. No, come on. There. There. Okay, Utrecht. So you know how to spell Utrecht, right? So they go and they pick up Caravaggio, and they bring it back. Now, part of the reason they bring it back is not only were they just sort of hit by this new style, but in addition to that, Utrecht is a Catholic city, right? Utrecht is the one province in the 12 united provinces that makes up the Netherlands. Remember, Holland is just a province, right? Of the 12 united provinces in the 17th century, Utrecht as a province was still under the control of the church. They were Catholic. So to practice Catholicism in Utrecht, you didn't need to hide, right? You didn't have to have these churches that were undercover, these clandestine churches, they called them, right? And so there's a great market for works of art that follow Caravaggio because, as we talked about, Caravaggio's art was inspired by the Counter-Reformation, which said that art had to follow certain rules to be effective as a teaching tool, right? And Caravaggio sort of hit it, nailed it, right? And so our Utrecht artists see this, and they come up with these translations of Caravaggio works, and they bring them back, right? And they're often very large, and many of them are big enough that we're pretty sure they were altarpieces in Catholic churches, either in the Utrecht province or for clandestine churches elsewhere, right? So this one was probably from a clandestine church in Amsterdam, because by the end of the 17th century, it was in an Amsterdam collection. And you can see the degree to which Ter Bruegen, and by the way, it's in the museum in Utrecht, the Central Museum, right? That's what UTTR stands for. He's seen Caravaggio's altarpiece in one of the churches in Rome. It's still in the church it was done for. And he's done this revision of it, right? It's got all the principal players, but they sort of jumbled it around a bit, right? And so you get the old man with the glasses looking on to the table. You get Christ coming in from the side and gesturing at St. Matthew, who then points at himself, right? It's all told through gesture. But instead of Christ coming in on the same plane as Matthew from the side, what Ter Bruegen does is he has to come in from our space. So we kind of follow him. We're like one of Jesus' followers, right? And he points to Matthew across the table, right? That is between us and Matthew. So it's a revisioning of the space of the composition. He also makes it in half figure. He brings it closer to us, right? So we're more sort of involved by proximity. We can look down at the account book on the table, the coins, the other accounts that have been tacked to the wall, you know, with pieces of wax, right? And the other thing, of course, is that it's brighter, right? Caravaggio's works tend to be lost in darkness, which is I like, right? And have that really strong sort of spotlighting coming in from the side, right? And we still have some spotlighting and a diagonal of light coming into Bruggen, but it's much, much brighter overall. And with that brightness comes a much broader range of colors as well. Much more colorful than Caravaggio. Blues and greens and pinks. Caravaggio is all earth tones, right? You could do Caravaggio with a palette with 3 or 4 colors on it, right? And certainly not the case for Terbruggen. So all of these Utrecht artists who have come down sort of hit on this new vision of religious pictures that Caravaggio has come up with and make their different versions. They don't always go from broad to close-up, right? This is done the opposite. Caravaggio's is close-up, and Honthorst's is further away, right? But you can see the degree to which he's populated with more figures, but he's picked up on a lot of the ideas. There's a figure that we see sort of 3/4 from the back on the left, who is taunting Jesus. In Honthorst's image, he's taunting him even more. He's got his tongue out, right? He's wagging his tongue at him. A figure on the left, Honthorst loves this, little figures that point to what we should be looking at. As he pulls up that robe, his fingers out so we can see. And again, even though it's darker in the background, notice the broader range of colors, right? Those blues and greens and pinks, right? And as Christ is being taunted, as they're hammering the crown of thorns on his head, we see the figure blowing the horn directly into his ear, right? Caravaggio is also very appealing to the Dutch audience because one of the things that made Caravaggio so appealing to the Counter-Reformation was its realism. Extraordinarily realistic. And that's something that seems to be appealing to the Dutch psyche as well for very different reasons, right? Not necessarily for Counter-Reformation reasons, but all of our art, everything you guys are researching has an extraordinarily realistic quality, and that's a typical thing for Dutch art, right? So this sort of feeds into that very, very cleanly. Okay. Now, our artists are not only looking at Caravaggio's religious works, but they're also looking at some secular works that he did, particularly mythological pieces, but also genre pieces, scenes of everyday life that Caravaggio had done as well. And so Honthorst, this doesn't copy a particular Caravaggio, but it copies the spirit of these mythological scenes that have extraordinarily strong sensual and erotic overtones. Right? So here's Bacchus. He's gotten himself so sick he's blue in the lips, right? From drinking too much. We think it might be a self-portrait. We don't know. There's no way to prove that, right? But he's got more grapes, and he's, his clothing is falling off, and there's all that flesh, and there's just this sort of, it appeals to your senses. It's about touch, it's about skin, and it's about sex, right? About the connection between alcohol intake and lowered moral standards. Honthorst, this is an extraordinarily erotic picture, right? Here's a satyr who's one of the followers of Bacchus, right? All of Bacchus' followers are half human and half animal, and that's because they like wine too much, right? And they give over to their animal side. And so he's playing with this woodland spirit, a nymph, right? And she doesn't mind being flirted with, and he's tickling her chin for now. But the way her body is posed, you get the sense that there's more touching coming on, right? And look what she's doing. She's just yanking on his beard like it's a cow udder, or dare I say something else, right? And that's the point, is that that's meant to be a sexual metaphor. And he's aroused. His nipples are erect, right, and sticking out. And he's holding that branch just enough that you don't have to look at how he's aroused otherwise, right? And that's part of the picture, is really getting aroused. So what's interesting about these Caravaggio pictures, on the one hand, they appeal to a very ardent Catholic spirit. But on the other hand, they appeal to this incredibly sexual, erotic side of things. And that's not that dissimilar from what we see in Italy as well in the 17th century, right? That's part of what made the Protestants so upset at this particular time in history, right? The difference was, how can you be so hypocritical about all this, right? So we get these overtly erotic images coming into Utrecht, and from there filtering to the rest of the Netherlands. It's also coming out of Caravaggio, and also coming from the exact same painters who are making these altar pieces for Catholic churches. Right? Maeve.
I was just wondering about
I think, I wouldn't say it's influenced by the church, and one must be careful about talking about the Catholic influence of Caravaggio, because Caravaggio as a painter, as a human, was at best lapsed, right? Lapsed as a Catholic, right? Well, I mean that he was not particularly devout in his own practice.
Okay.
Right? Sorry? The bigger pieces are all the large pieces are commissions. He's not going to do those on spec. That's Calling of St. Matthew, the Death of the Virgin. A lot of them ended up getting rejected because of things they didn't like about them. Not a lot, but a few. Get rejected because of things they don't like about them. But no, those are he enjoys very good church sponsorship. Well, that's you're isolating one image, right? And there aren't any altar pieces with David and Goliath. This is an Old Testament scene, so that's a very different issue, right? But if you look at the Calling of St. Matthew, you look at the Madonna del Popolo, you look at the Death of the Virgin, these things are 8 or 9 feet tall. That's the sort of thing you just don't make for anything. The larger pieces, but also mostly the religious pieces, right? Anything with a sort of a New Testament religiosity is most certainly a church commission, right? But that's not all he did. He did a number of mythological scenes as well, right? And so anyway, to talk about the Catholic influence of Caravaggio, Caravaggio's religious works appealed to Catholics, okay? But Caravaggio's own lifetime got him in trouble with Catholics, right? Because he was apparently a scrapper. He was in fights all the time. He got in a knife fight and killed somebody, right? He was openly homosexual, right? He died running away from the police, right? He was fleeing the police in Naples, and he tried to hide in a swamp, and he got stung by mosquitoes, and he got malaria, and he died. Right? He's only like in his 30s or so. So, I just wanted to correct that name so we don't think about why is Caravaggio popular. It's not because of Caravaggio, it's because of Caravaggio's pictures, right? And that's
I guess I was wondering if this is not the Catholic view.
That's right. It's still very much influenced by Caravaggio, right? But not necessarily having anything to do with the church, right? Although we don't know the original painter, and certainly Bacchus to Christian symbolism, right? Bacchus is the god of wine. Wine is important as Christian theology, right? So the idea of Bacchus, we looked at those pictures by Goldsmith. We saw that pen picture with Venus and Bacchus and Ceres, and remember without Bacchus and Ceres, Venus would freeze. Well, a Christian would have looked at that and said, oh, love is Venus, Bacchus is wine, and Ceres is grain, bread. So without bread and wine, love dies, right? So the communion. So they would have definitely seen within something like this, well, more of the Caravaggio, right? Could have easily read into that something that has sort of broader religious influence, right? Are we good? Okay. Good. So they're bringing back other elements of Caravaggio's work, right? And they often, right, in a Caravaggio style, present to us extraordinarily erotic images. So Maeve, you had asked about images of prostitution, right? Here is one, right? The procuress. So this man is the customer. And there's no doubt about it whatsoever because of what he's doing, right? He's got a money bag in his left hand. You can see the end of it clenched in his hand. And he's got coins in his hands as he reaches forward to give them to the woman in blue. Right? The Honhorst loves these hidden candles, right? And the woman has this musical instrument, right? She's got a lute, which is symbolic for a woman's body as well, insofar as musical instruments are there, right? Certain instruments, music in general, I'm going to point you where you can see music, but as a metaphor in paintings, right? Music is about love, right? And your Frank Sinatra set would always say, let's go make some beautiful music, right? That idea. That same idea here, right? And within that, certain musical instruments took on certain symbolic references, right? So the lute, given the soft, round belly, right? And the pipe, right, became sort of metaphors for very particular elements of it. So she's got that. She stopped playing music. She's looking at him rather charmingly, right? Playfully. and of course the cleavage, right, all adds to the fact that this is an image of prostitution. And the woman on the left, again, that pointing, right, she's the madam of the house, right? She's the procuress, the one who procures the customers for the prostitute, right? And she too is based directly on a Caravaggio. I think that's in the online lecture that I put up this afternoon. Now this led within our Utrecht painters to single figures, right? Rather than these broader compositions, we have these single figures that isolate figures that are related to the ones in the more easy to understand images. So on the right, there's no doubt, right, what's going on in this picture. There's no, the only doubt is how do viewers react to it, right? That's the only point of discussion is who wants this, for what context, and how do they see it, right? How do they judge the man in red? That's what is open for discussion. But insofar as what the picture is getting across as a narrative, there is no doubt. On the left, it's getting a little bit grayer. In that, we've lost the procuress, we've lost the customer, we have only the woman with the musical instrument with clothing that seems to be falling off. Now, the clothing that's come off her shoulder already adds that level of eroticism, because it's unnecessary, right? She's not as chaste as if she had it buttoned up to her neck. So that is signaling to you one way that you might interpret it, where instead of looking at somebody approaching her, you're the somebody, right? You're the one who's approached her, and she, look at the faces of them. It's the exact same reaction to the person that's looking at her. Only now that reaction is directed to you, right? And what's the clue? It's not a lute, so that complicates it a bit. It clouds it a bit. But the fact that her clothing has come down so far, even though her hands are in the way of seeing anything, is a way in which the artist is signaling to us to look at these things a little differently. Right? Caravaggio has this wonderful image of Bacchus with, again, the clothing coming off. Right? And look, what he's doing. He's here. Right? Come and join me for a drink. I guess we know anymore that that's really a bad idea. Right? A guy comes up to you half clothed and says, come have a drink with me. It's like, I think to go home. But with the drink, of course, comes everything else. At least that seems to be underscoring what Caravaggio is suggesting to us. And so when we think about that as the origin for these images, then I love this picture. I think this picture is just extraordinary. The presence, the way he leans out that window, looks like he's leaning out of the picture, right? That he's actually in our space almost. But he's offering us a drink, and he's offering us music, right? It's the exact same violin the girl just had. And the question is, what are we supposed to do with that, right? Do we accept it? And if we do, what does it mean about us, right? Because we're put in the position of making a choice. Do we participate or not? And if we do participate, is that a neutral decision? You know what I mean by that, right? Is that a decision where yes means the same as no? That neither of them come with a value judgment on them, right? And that's a question for debate, right? What does it mean to participate in these images? Are they moral warnings about sensory pleasure? And if they are, who wants this functioning that way? Or do they open it up so that they can be enjoyable at the same time, and we end up going back to my talk from Maeve's question before, where our painters and our owners are not above the judgment, but that we all are part of this. That this is just shining a light on the world we live in. This then kind of comes full circle, right? From Utrecht, this interest in these single genre figures, scenes of everyday life with a single figure, that engage with us directly, appeal to our senses, this comes back to Haarlem, right? And one of the best at it is Frans Hals. Extraordinary. And this is in one of the most famous 17th century Dutch images, right? The jolly drinker, the jolly toper. who, just like Haunt Horse image, he's reaching out, he's offering us a drink. And the question is, as this is taking place, what is our response? Because we don't know, right? No response is indicated. And does it open us up for judgment? Is there a right or a wrong answer here to what the Jolly Toper is offering us? And that's a difficult question. And that's the basis of an extraordinary level of debate. And there's proof that we can marshal that says saying yes is bad. And I can show you proof. In fact, the next slide up shows you proof that saying yes is sometimes seen as bad. But when you've divorced it from any of the sort of images of either of these, right, are entirely divorced from images of prostitution or anything that colors it negatively directly, is it still potentially a negative image or not? Right? And I can't look at the Jolly Toper and not just be happy. I just think it's one of the most infectiously charming images ever painted. So if we look at what's going on in Haarlem during Frans Hals's time, right? One of the traditions, one of the conventions in Haarlem painting was what we call merry companies or elegant companies. A group of people gathered around a feast, sometimes outside, sometimes inside, and always sort of with the idea of, Netflix and chill, right? That the whole idea is that they're getting together to hang out together with some interest in love, right? And part of the convention of these images that started around 1610 in Haarlem, and they're still going strong in the 1630s, right? As one of the kinds of paintings that people seem to like, is that you'll get a couple of people coming in from the right, and they're looking out at us, and they're not yet participating, right? They're just coming in, they're seeing what's going on. We've got love for sale. We've got a wonderful feast going on. They're at the moment of decision. Am I going to step? They obviously come here, but the question is, they could still leave, right? They haven't yet joined in. So they end up presenting to us through these elegant companies this idea that there are these morally fraught decisions that we have in front of us and that nobody's safe, right? One of the things, I used to do a lot of reading about film back in the day. And one of the people said about the slapstick comedies in the 30s, like Cary Grant stuff and Katharine Hepburn and whatnot. Does that mean anything to anybody? Slapstick comedies from the 30s, leave it at that. Was that they usually ended up showing aristocrats being every bit as stupid as common people. That it's, the stupidity of mankind is everywhere. And I think that's kind of this as well, right? That the stupidity of mankind does not know class boundaries, right? So there's our people coming in from the right, and you'll notice, again, cleavage, a lot of it. I don't know enough about costume history to know if that's acceptable or not. It seems to me that it's a trigger for the fact what has brought them here, an interest in love. And when we add to that what's going on around the table, it certainly seems to be an interest in sensory satisfaction, right? Satisfying your senses. Because directly in front of them is this table. Across the table from them are more couples with ample bosoms hanging out, right? And other little clues that begin to suggest to us that this moral quandary, I guess, I don't think they're having trouble making their mind up. The decision they're about to make is one that comes with consequence, right? That it may not be good always to do something based on fulfilling your sensory desire, right? Like if you ate every time you saw something that tasted good, right? You'd be obese, right? And there's something to be said about restraint, yeah? And I think that's part of this image. Margaret, you had your hand.
I was just gonna say, you can see the older ladies and maybe a guy in the back, they're more covered.
Up here.
Yeah, than these kind of young
Yeah.
people. So it really shows you like maybe they're really out looking for something. They don't need to be looking for anything, so they're more covered up.
I think part of these images and the reason that they became so popular is that each one kind of can jumble the cards a bit, shuffle the cards, and deal them out again. And you got the same cards, but next time you shuffle them and deal them out, it's sort of a different way of looking at it. And And sometimes we'll see that the figures in the background are people that are already deeply engaged,
Yeah.
right? And sometimes you get these ones that offset, right? And the point is to spend time looking and find out if there are clues there that tell us how we might think about this, how we're supposed to read it, right? So if we look at the couple on the left, and again, even more clear, the guy in the back is already grabbing on, right? There's this servant there beside them, but look what's at her feet. The monkey, an ape. Apes in images, right? This is not just, didn't the guy in Friends have a pet monkey for a while? Didn't Ross for a while have a pet monkey? It's not like that, right? Whenever you see a monkey appearing in a picture, a scene of everyday life in particular, right? I mean, the jungle scene is different, but it's a scene of everyday life. Monkeys are symbols of mockery, right? And we still say things like monkeying around, and we still say aping, right? If you're imitating somebody, you're aping them. And well before Darwin, people understood the similarity between sort of how monkeys carry themselves and how we do, right? So the monkey at the bottom is an idea of mockery, right? And it's a trigger for us to look at this picture and say, these people are people that are not necessarily worthy of our praise and esteem, right? That these are people that are worthy of our mockery as well. That this is not necessarily a positive image. Now, just because it's a negative image doesn't mean it can't be fun, right? Oftentimes the best sorts of admonitions are the funny ones, right? A joke to instruct is usually something that we see. In fact, there's a phrase in the 17th century that talks about paintings that were made for amusement and learning, right? Learning and amusement, learning and for mock, right? Mockery and learning at the same time. And this picture fits into that. So if we go back to Frans Hals and we realize that this is out there as a potential way of looking at engaging with your senses, do his works do that? Might they be looked at that way? Or when you remove the rest of the trappings, does that change the meaning of the piece? And there's not one answer here. Right? Everyone can bring something different to it. Whether it's the Jolly Toper or the woman at the right with the empty glass, the innkeeper, right? Doesn't she sort of look like, I don't know, like Sean Penn almost, a younger Sean Penn? She has a sort of androgynous quality with those eyebrows, right? But she's pouring more wine, or about to pour more wine, and maybe she's suggesting there's any more wine to pour, right? But you look behind her shoulder on the wall, there's a tally mark, right? That's your drinks. She's doing that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? But doing it vertically, as opposed. So we know, looking in, that she's talking to us, and we're soused, right? Because she's marked how many drinks we have, and she's showing us that you just ordered another one, and she's going, sorry, bud, game's over, right? Watched the Blues Brothers the other night. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here, right? And that's sort of the message of her as well, right? And they're humorous. They're engaging and humorous at the same time. And it's not only Frans Hals doing these things. They're extraordinary pictures. They're really fun, right? So Judith Leister, one of our few women artists from the 17th century, working in Harlem at exactly the same time as Frans Hals, gives us this image of a man in a theatrical costume looking into an empty pot, right? His name is Pickled Herring, the character from the comic stage. So she's put this person in this theatrical costume, and he too is looking into the empty jug, and is finding that it's empty, and looking out to us as if to say something about maybe wasted time. He spent all afternoon drinking and smoking, and now time has run out on him, right? Hals, remember from our little Quizlet, spent most of his time doing portraiture, right? That's what he's best known for. And the vibrancy and immediacy and liveliness that he brings to these genre scenes translates over directly to how he paints portraits. They have an extraordinary sense of momentary activity. In other words, he catches people right in the middle of doing something, to the point where they're not posing, it seems, even though they obviously are. they give you the sense that they are captured from life in a very particular moment. And he loves this artifice, Halls does. There are other artists, but very few as good as he. About like, so here's the thing, right? Imagine, I'm gonna turn my back on you guys, right? So we're sitting at a pub, and I'm over here, and I hear you saying something, right? And that's the moment he's caught. Is this you've captured his attention, right? And he's not yet wheeled around. But he's sort of like, right? No, what you just said is wrong, and here's how it really is, right? The guy at the bar, and there's nothing threatening about it, right? It's just incredibly charming and vivacious, and it comes right directly at us, right? He also did these group portraits of militiamen. These are like the National Guard, right? The Harlem Civic Guard. And he was actually a member of the Civic Guard Company, and he was commissioned to do a number of these group portraits. Each of the figures is life-size. This is like Rembrandt's Night Watch, right? Is a derivation of this same theme. Rembrandt went a step further by giving them a narrative, right? All Frans Hals does is he gathers them around the table, but he makes it look, you can hear this picture, as if you can hear the immediacy of what's going on. And the tradition for these images had been really stiff, right? Going back to the 16th century, just line them up, right? And it's egalitarian, it's democratic, they're all on the same level, right? And Hals breaks that up, right? Rembrandt breaks it up even further, right? And that's later by 15 years or so. But this same idea of, I love this picture. It's just so much fun. We're going to go see these. They're in the Frans Hals Museum, right? And they're life size. There's about 6 of these, right? And they're really fun. And he's looking around and look, you're the waiter now. Excuse me. He's rude, right? My drink is empty, right? But it's not the proper way to behave, right? When you go to a pub in Europe, you might say, pardon, over, yeah? But you wouldn't say, like this, right? That's jerky. But the guy behind him, see what he's doing? He's squeezing lemon on the oysters. He's got a plate of raw oysters. And you're caught right in the middle of something. And the way he paints, which we'll see in person a little bit, is so extraordinarily modern in the way he doesn't blend any of the brush strokes. It looks as immediate as the poses. It looks like he had to paint quickly, even though that's a total artifice, right? He's not really painting quickly. It just looks like he is, because he's so deft with laying these strokes down. Look at the blue in here, how none of those strokes are blended together. This is part of the reason what we'll see when we go see it live, is to check out some of this stuff, right? One last thing to cover, and then I guess we're probably to bump Jan Steen over to Tuesday, because we're not going to get to him in 4 minutes or 5 minutes, right? But one other thing to point to before we look at Jan Steen's pictures is one more tradition, which is peasant imagery. And they use the term peasant rather loosely. It's somebody who doesn't live in a city. So that means it's both farmers who own the farms and the laborers who work the farms fall under the word peasant. The term peasant comes from the term for countryman, right? A man of the country is a peasant, a paysan, right? That's the root of the word. So we use the word as something uncultured and uncouth, right? Don't be such a peasant. But the term there just meant a rural resident, right? Other words we have, right? You know, the word villain comes from villager, right? Non-urbanite. Villain in French is somebody who comes from a village rather than from the city. And it goes back to what was the attitude even here, which is that the people who lived outside the cities were less cultured than the people who did, right? And that's why they paint farmers or peasants, right, differently, because we see them now. These are like the antithesis of these merry companies. Instead of aristocrats making these moral decisions, our peasants have already made their decision, right? And what we're seeing is the after effects of that decision-making. A rowdy party full of drinking and smoking and dancing, right? It's a noisy, boisterous image inside this darkened inn, we assume. Look at the size of the glass, right? There's a little cool drink cup, right, that we've talked about a number of times, a little drinking game, right? But they're sort of deep in it, and even the figures lolling around the table behind the fiddle player. Doesn't he remind you, Thomas, of this? Just totally reminds me. Remember the Flatboat Men? Yeah, down at the National Gallery in the 1970s. I'm sure he must have loved this stuff, right? And how can you not love this stuff? I mean, these are such great pictures, right? I wish I taught this stuff more often. I haven't taught this in years, right? But every time we get to these Van Ostade images of peasants, particularly early on in his career, around the 1630s, these antidotes to the merry companies, they're just going at it. And again, the thing to do is to look for clues as to how to interpret it, right? Because each one might not carry the exact same moralizing content. So, for example, with the two of these, arguably the one on the left is a little bit more innocent than the one on the right. Because the one on the right has it's not really conflict. He's trying to get that lady to dance with him. Right? He's yanking at her arms to get her to dance with him. And the guy's throwing his arms up. He stopped playing the music, right? And we've got other little clues that suggest that it's not all harmonious anymore. That things are starting to break down. And in fact, this guy back here, right, is, I'll have to go look at it when we see it in person. I think he's thrown up. Right? He's definitely down on his arms, right? And I think he's fallen off of that bench, right? And his head is down like that. And I think he's horking all over his hands, right? But we have to go back and look more closely there to see for sure if that's what he's doing. But that's our clue, right? That's our 8. That's our little visual clue that suggests that this group of people, right? And he may be there to offset others, right? But it begins to say, okay, not everything here is functioning harmoniously, right? 2 more Van Ostades and then we'll quit. Drinkers at a pub, smoking, reading the little flyers, right? Again, like we saw with the Franz Halls, we know how many they had. Because when the woman comes up and gives them, I wish they still do this, right? It's sort of like getting dim sum or something, right? You keep the place and they know how much to charge you based on that. But there's a little ticket back there on the wall behind him to mark this up. So that sort of sets the stage for Jan Steen, who we'll look at on Tuesday. These extraordinary images of boisterous interiors. They're so much fun, right? And the Mortz House has 6 or so on display, right? The Rijksmuseum has another 2 or 3. You're doing it, right? You're doing one of them. So we'll look at these more closely on Tuesday, right? And then we'll move from there to looking at still life. So on Tuesday, Shelley emailed me this morning and said, hey, you didn't update, and I realized I hadn't updated the schedule and there was no readings for today. But there is one reading for Tuesday on still life painting. So first half of class, we'll look at Jan Steen, and then we'll move from there to looking at, it's almost like this picture, but without the people. Just the tabletop with the still life on it. And see how we might think about those things as well. Okay? Good, so you got something to play with over the weekend, right? Be sure to get your hands on a notebook if you haven't got one yet. The other thing is be sure you start to look for how you're going to spend your free time, right? Don't wait until the last minute, because then you're going to go back to the hotel or something like that. Only I get to do that because I've been there a few times, right? And I perform more than you do. Olivia, I've got your. Is that your? That's not the dog, is it?
No, the dog is at the front.
Olivia asked if she has a dog sit. She asked if she could bring a puppy in or a dog in, and I told her I can't say so because the university doesn't allow that. But and I didn't know if anybody here was allergic or whatever. So I thought you had him in a box with holes in it. Sorry?
You want to see a picture of the dog?
Oh, I'd love to see a picture of the dog. I'm figure out. Oh, he's a good dog.
Yeah, his name's Otis.
Otis.
Yeah.
You know, our first dog, the first dog that my wife and I had together was named Odo.
Odo.
Odo. That didn't. The Czech means he doesn't.
No, it's Jesse's.
Oh, it's Jesse. Sorry. Where are you? I know I've got you.